Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Recently, I started doing a lot more PvP on my Outlaw Rogue for Season 2 content. On this channel, we cover a lot of PvP, especially with so many 5-5 1-on-1 duels, and it's definitely a part of the game that I still do enjoy to this day. The last season, at least at the very beginning of that season, I found myself putting it on a bit of a back burner and came back to it after the Mythic Plus and the raiding grind was over with, and I was surprised just how good Outlaw Rogue felt in War Within. Had a ton of fun in Season 1, and I've so far been able to continue that PvP journey into Season 2. There was a ton of you guys that asked me if I'm going to be putting out a PvP guide for Outlaw Rogue anytime soon, especially with so many of you that are playing Subtlety and Assassination but are looking for something fresh and different to play. And I felt like I at least should get the Elite for the season before I make a proper PvP guide. Now that I've done that, I wanted to throw together a guide on how to PvP as an Outlaw Rogue for Season 2 content for the patch 11.1, but also 11.15, which is arriving sometime soon. And this guide will go over everything you need from rotation, how to gear a character, some of the different talent builds, whether you're looking to play Fatebound or Trickster, and yes, both of those playstyles are still viable even after the most recent buffs and nerfs that we saw the other week. As always, if you guys want to see more regular updates and even class guides for the War Within expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. There's a pretty good chance that I'm going to title this video as a Outlaw Rogue guide in preparation for 11.15 specifically, instead of like Season 2 or 11.1, just because the patch is soon approaching and the rogue spec isn't changing too much. That, or I'll have this part deleted out of the video and you've never would have seen it to begin with. But we'll take a look at the rogue spec for War Within. It's in a pretty fun spot right now, and the first thing I like to do when going over some of the different builds, which I'm going to try to be very quick with this video and give you as much detail as I can, but I'll try not to blabber on a little too much just to give you all the concise information you need. First of all, let's start with my favorite part, are the talent builds. And rogues, I would say, have two builds right now, or at least Outlaw Rogues in this season. I would say there's a Fatebound build, but then there's also a damage-oriented Trickster build. And I first want to share with the Trickster build just because this one is really fun. I think you would have a blast with it if this is your first time picking up Outlaw ever. The Trickster playstyle is going to be a lot more damage focused because Trickster has gotten, as a hero spec, a number of changes in order to make it much better and much more palatable for this season. It also surprisingly has good crit scaling. Even though crit as a stat is generally dampened within PvP, it's not as effective as it is in raids and dungeons, but this kind of does end up fighting against it and makes crit a pretty good stat, especially when it comes to you trying to achieve some of the biggest numbers out there. Like if you've played a Subtlety specs before, or if you've played any other styles of rogues that were all about big burst damage, this one definitely has some of those big satisfying numbers that are going to pop out on your screen. This one also plays heavily around the ability of Killing Spree, which is a hard-hitting ability, a really hard-hitting ability for this spec, so this one gets to use that setup a lot more frequently. The Fatebound version of the Rogue, and by the way, I'll have the links towards both of these builds in the description of this video, so you can just kind of import them directly. You just go over here and hit the import button, import them here into the text loadout, name it whatever you like, but I'll have both of the builds available in the description of this video. But the Fatebound version of the Rogue spec does about the same damage as Trickster. I'd say just a little bit less bursty. It has a lot more random and passive damage from the coin flip ability, but it has excellent mobility, which is a must-have for any battlegrounds or any objective-based play, or if you're just looking to zoom around the map. I mean, being able to have access to 4 grapple hooks in a row is insanely good. The coin playstyle is a lot more passive, so if you just want an easier playstyle where you don't have to think about the procs or lineups, this actually might be better if you're looking to play a more proc passive playstyle rather than something you actually have to line up and utilize abilities for in order to get the most value out of. But definitely give both Trickster and Fatebound a go to find the playstyle that you truly enjoy. Both of the builds are very good and both are very viable. As for PvP talents, it doesn't matter what build you end up running. Majority of the PvP talents are kind of set in stone. For the most part, we're running preemptive maneuver for defenses uses, since rogues can die in a stun. This one ends up being really good if you can pre-feint a stun, with feint being a sizable defensive ability that is part of our general kit. Smoke Weapon is another one that's a good set in stone, whether you're trying to capture objectives in a battleground or trying to seclude an enemy away from the healer while they're in a stun. Because they took away a lot of the good Outlaw mandatory talents, this one ends up being a pretty nice filler and ends up being quite good in most situations. The final talent really comes down to your preference at this point. I think Dismantle is a fantastic option if you're facing up against melee that use a weapon. So think warriors, think rogues, think marksmanship hunters. If you're playing against casters, and there's frequent stuns, you could always go turn the tables, because this way you're gonna have passive damage every time you get stunned up, especially when you're not the focus target and the kill target, especially when they just use stuns to crack control you. This just amplifies your damage and allows you to be pretty effective for 12 seconds. Another one that's also pretty good here is Tricks of Thick as Thieves, but it does mean you'll have to run Tricks of the Trade instead of Blackjack. Blackjack does give you a little bit extra pressure through saps and blinds, but if you want to go for raw damage, like in Solo Shuffle in particular, Tricks of the Trade is a really good one. It does mean, however, you will need to make a couple of macros for your tricks in order to have an easier time managing the ability itself. Now, in Solo Shuffle, every single time you queue up, for example, you can't necessarily make a macro that just kind of targets the closest DPS. The best you could do is have a party 1 macro and a party 2. So depending on the order that you are in the group, it's going to target one player or the other. The best you can do is just test out this macro to see what player targets at the start of the match before you run in, so then you have an idea which player is going to target, and just have both of them available just so you can trigger the right target when you go in for burst or when you're going to do any kind of setup or damage. Another one that's also good, but not amazing, is Drink Up Your Hearties. It just grants your allies a little bit extra healing every time you drink a sippy cup. None of these are really amazing. They're all really niche, and depends on the situation which one is going to be good, but none of them are like a mandatory set in stone. They removed a lot of those that we used to have as Outlaw, which was really nice just to have some really solid PvP talents, but now they're more situational based more than anything. So it's really honestly up to you which one you want to run. Next, I want to go over really quickly the rotation of Outlaw Rogue within PvP, which is not that different from Outlaw Rogue within Dungeons and Raids, but there are some adjustments that you will make for PvP content specifically. And the rotational priority of like comm point builders and comm point spenders is actually a lot more streamlined within PvP. In most cases, you're trying to use the ability of Ambush as much as possible, which can either be used with Audacity procs or while in stealth or during Subterfuge, which is basically anytime we vanish, we get a Subterfuge window, kind of like a Shadow Dance for subtlety, but for Outlaw, it's just like normal Subterfuge with Vanish. So whenever it's available, in most cases, Ambush will be highest priority comm point builder, as is the most efficient and hardest hitting. Outside of that, pistol shots with opportunity procs are also fantastic, and they are second highest when ambush isn't available, or whenever you don't have the energy for an ambush. Like if you're in Subterfuge window, have ambushes available, but just don't have enough energy because you're just drained, pistol shots with opportunity are just going to be just fine as a replacement for a time being. When nothing else is available, basically building comm points with Sinister Strikes. Cheap Shot is also another comm point builder, but we really utilize it more as a stun, though when you do need to stun targets, this will be your highest priority comm point builder in a way. And while Ghost Strike is a comm point builder, we don't actually use it that frequently in PvP, or rather we don't spam it like we do in PvE content. Instead, we actually save Ghost Strike for when we use burst, when we use damage abilities, like when we dive in a Vanish for a bunch of between the eyes, crack shot windows, or if you're trying to send a big killing spree into a target. So this one you actually in most cases will save until you're about ready to burst on a target. As for finishers, once you generate about 6+ comm points, or 5+ is fate bound, and I'll talk about the fate bound adjustment in a second here. But in most cases, when you are available to do so, you should be using Killing Spree to dump big damage into a target. This is a very hard-hitting ability. It's no longer kind of like a defensive sustain ability like it used to be in previous expansions. It actually cranks out quite a bit of damage and should be used often, usually outside of Subterfuge windows, just so you don't lose out on that Subterfuge value. Though within Subterfuge windows or in stealth, your main primary finisher for damage will be Between the Eyes, mostly because with Crackshot we get free dispatch with the Between the Eyes, so it becomes the most valuable finisher to use in stealth. However, out of stealth and outside of major burst, you'll primarily be using dispatch as your primary comm point finisher. Now, there is also Kidney Shot, which is another finisher. All it does is stun locks a target. If you do need a stun, this comm point finisher will always be the highest priority above everything else. Like in most cases in PvP, you're going to be stun locking the target before you burst it. So do be aware that Kidney Shot does exist, and it's kind of interchangeable with Cheap Shot as one of the different ways that we can put stuns against our targets. As for the fate bound adjustment, you're basically spending your comm points. Instead of 6 comm points on a finisher, you're doing 5+, because you only need 5 comm points to flip a coin. And it's arguable right now that more coin flips can result in more tails, which is just cosmic damage, or heads, which just raw does an increase towards the damage and abilities, and every time you flip a coin, it continues to stack with more damage or a bigger damage amp. So I argue right now that it's better to just keep flipping the coin at 5 coin points to churn out more finishers, more coin flips, rather than going for more quality and value finishers, which is more or less how you would end up adjusting for the Fate Bound specifically. Now, openers for Outlaw Rogue are not nearly as important as they are for Subtlety and Assassination, because getting that perfect opener as those two specs, there's definitely a lot of incentive to be able to do a ton of damage from stealth. For Outlaw, you kind of dip in and out of stealth super easily, but there are some ways for you to improve your opener to make sure that it's as efficient as it can be. So one of the openers that I usually like to do, especially when I have all my cooldowns available, is before you get into a combat encounter, I usually like to Adrenaline Rush, roll the bones. Some rogues like to go and send those common points into a slice and dice, but I feel like it's a little bit too much because your first dispatch or even between the eyes with Crackshot is going to activate slice and dice for free. And in most cases from there, I just gotta go into a cheap shot and then spam between the eyes as long as my common points allow me to. And in some cases, you're just gonna be able to get yourself a bunch of, like a train of common points back to back, just spamming out as many between the eyes as possible from the opener. It's kind of wild, but it is a very highly effective opener, and it does a ton of damage for the most part. And likewise, whenever you're bursting somebody down, you can use the vanish windows in order to catch a re-stealth, cheap shot, and do the same thing again afterwards. So your burst as well as your opener are going to be very similar to one another. So I guess I'm covering burst and openers together in a single window. Another way to set up some bursts on a different target is to build up calm points, and this is great for a swap. So then you'll just switch to maybe like a healer, you'll lock him down to a stun, press Adrenaline Rush or whatever combo you have, use Killing Spree in order to dish out as much damage as possible, and then spam your dispatches, or I guess between the eyes if you do end up picking up a stealth window afterwards. But outside of that, a lot of the damage from the spec will come from sustained damage. Not a lot of it is going to be from burst damage, but those are some of the different ways that you can set up different bursts. Getting a shot Killing Spree, cheap shot between the eyes. In some cases, you could technically go for a cheap shot into a Killing Spree, like if the target is super low. That was not that great on ethics in terms of like value, because you're wasting the value of Subterfuge and Crack Shot, where you're able to use between the eyes and get a bunch of between the eyes and dispatches at the same time. But if the target is like ridiculously low, it is worth it, I think, to burn a Killing Spree, especially as a Trickster Outlaw in particular, just because that one places a lot more value on Killing Spree. But generally, you'll try to use Killing Spree outside of your major setups with Subterfuge, if whatever possible. Also, the rules for Roll the Bones have changed by quite a bit. Because of our tier set, we're now able to have a high chance to roll more buffs whenever we roll the bones. So we are going to be using roll the bones a lot more aggressively. Roll the bones also allows us to push past beyond the limits of our winning streak buff. So the more buffs you get, the more damage our dispatch is going to do. This also applies for dispatches within Crackshot, but those dispatches will not consume the tier set, though normal dispatches will consume it. But because of the tier set, we're encouraged to roll the bones a lot more aggressively. This combined together with things like Supercharger, which basically increases the value of our next two finishers, making them feel like they consumed additional combo points. So it's going to make Killing Spree hit harder, it's going to make Between the Eyes hit harder, but also it helps out this major cooldown reduction mechanic of Outlaw Rogue. As you spend calm points into a finisher, you reduce the cooldowns of vast majority of your abilities. This effect recently got nerfed, and it is pretty noticeable, but it still is highly effective, which gives us a reason to just keep on rolling. And basically the rules for Roll the Bones right now is you basically just keep rolling until you get 5 buffs. That's the only time you really stop rolling, and you hold on to it for as long as possible. But what I usually do is I don't just roll on cooldown. I usually will roll like when I'm about to set up a burst window, when I'm about to go for a vanish, get a cheap shot, do some damage, or when I'm landing a kidney shot and I want to sink that supercharger into a big Killing Spree. So you don't necessarily need to spam Roll the Bones at all times and kind of have it waste globals while you're bursting a target down. That's usually not worth. What you kind of want to do is use it whenever you're setting up some decent damage or about to have like a proper bursty go. Next, let's talk about how to properly gear your rogue for PvP. When it comes to secondary stats in particular, as you're picking out your conquest pieces to outfit your character with, you're going to want a bit of haste in this character, especially when you're playing the ambush builds that we're playing with right now. You want about roughly between 16 to 20% haste within PvP combat, which is going to be, it sounds like it's a lot. I actually definitely have way more haste than that. But the more haste you have, the better energy you're going to have, but you don't really need too much more than 20%. I definitely got to scale mine back down a little bit. Afterwards, versatility is going to be your best secondary stat. So after you reach the cap of between 16 to 20% haste, dump the rest into versatility. And if you have any side stats as like crit or mastery potentially, crit ends up being a slightly better option, especially when you end up playing with Trickster, because now it has some crit scaling as of the 11.1 update, which is really good. It feels amazing to play with, but critical strike is going to be slightly better than mastery. So if you're trying to play Outlaw, but also subtlety and assassination, gearing the spec is going to be a little bit unique. Some players have tried to go into mastery, but it has so little value in general that it's probably best just to stick with critical strike for the most part. As for your actual embellishments that you'll want to run in your gear, you'll want to go with the elemental focusing embellishment. That's like the only really good one. It doesn't do a ton of damage, but it's like the only one that really does any significant damage. When it comes to your enchants in particular, you do want to go speed on your bracers, on your cloak, as well as your boots. I have my Defender's March because it's more of a PvE legs, but eventually I will get the PvP ones, as well as I get a little bit more crafting done. But you basically want to go with speed as much as possible, and the rest of your stats, like your rings, could also go into versatility unless you desperately need more haste. For weapons, I go with Authority of Radiant Power. Make sure you pick up a armor kit for your legs, as well as Crystalline Radiance for your chest piece as well. And the same thing for your gems. It really depends what stats you're gonna need. I would pick up at least one Enduring Bloodstone for PvP. That's like gonna be your big meta gem, or the Algari Diamond gem that you'll be running for the season. But the rest of them could be outfitted with versatility and critical strike if you have reached your cap of haste, versatility being your better stats. So you can kind of allocate those gems exactly as you see fit, depending whether you need more haste or not. But with that being said, that should be enough to get you at least started playing an Outlaw Rogue for PvP within Season 2, whether it is in the patch 11.1 or 11.15, since no too many class changes are happening with this next upcoming update. As always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this update. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate it. Also, join our Discord community to keep up with all the newest class changes and future patch notes, as we'll likely be seeing more of them as 11.15 official rolls out very soon. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.